Well, I'll say this much. This game can certainly draw. Yeah, I know. Kinda lame. Whatever. Let's just get on with it. Doodle World, a 2021 homebrew release for the Nintendo Entertainment System conceived by Nate and Araceli Peters. The story behind the game being that Nate Peters saw his daughter Araceli doodling some stuff on paper and decided he'd make a whole game like that, and there you go. Now that's actually quite nice and wholesome and rather heartwarming. Right, so, the story proper goes that King Eraser and his band of office supplies is wreaking havoc on Doodle World, and it's up to Doodle person, I guess, to put a stop to their schemes. The game presents you with 5 worlds to venture through, each with 3 stages apiece, and basically plays like a stripped-down version of Super Mario Bros. You run to the right, you bop on enemies to defeat them with some exceptions that are plainly obvious. You pick up crayons that are added to a counter, and for every 100 crayons you collect, you get an extra life. You can collect flashing crayons that give you temporary invincibility. There's a notepad you could touch that takes you to a bonus room full of crayons. And of course, if you touch an enemy or fall into a pit, or barely fall into a pit, you lose a life. But the game is fairly generous with its checkpoints, and gaining extra lives shouldn't be too much of an issue if you nail all the bonus rooms. At the end of the first 2 stages, you have a notepad that you could touch to warp you to the next stage. The third stage ends with a boss fight, where you avoid their attacks and bop on their head a couple times to defeat them, and move on to the next world. Doodle World boasts 2 modes of play, the standard normal mode, and a kids mode where they drop the second stage from each world to replace all the excess enemies with eraser enemies, and make it so that you could unalive the bosses in a couple hops. Honestly, you could probably blaze through this one in about as much time as a typical Super Mario speedrun these days, but even the normal mode isn't that overly difficult. That said, there are a couple things to bear in mind. First off, there's no backtracking. This is old school Mario 1 mentality here. You scroll to the right and that's it. Secondly, control, which for the most part is fine, responsive, and the jumping is actually quite fluid. Just make sure that when you're leaping you don't let go of the D-pad, because once you do, all forward momentum is lost and you just drop down. Thirdly, it would be nice if there was a way to differentiate between enemies that move back and forth on a platform and those who will walk off and just go about their business. A color distinction, if you will, much like the Koopas of Mario fame. And finally, there's the collision detection, which can be a bit suspect in that sometimes bopping on an enemy will not only unalive them, but also unalive you at the same time. This has happened to me a couple times and it made me weary of stomping on enemies unless I really needed to. Also, no continues. You lose all your lives, it's game over, back to the beginning. If there's a continue quote of some sort, I haven't found it, though to be fair, the game really isn't all that long. I was able to beat normal mode in roughly 20 minutes, though I like to take my sweet ass time, so with enough practice you could probably whip through this one fairly quickly. Despite some of the quibbles brought up, Doodle World is a nice, breezy little game that's fairly easy to pick up and play, and again, shouldn't really take that long to complete. So naturally, the standout feature of this game are the graphics, where everything is depicted as little animated doodles on lined notepad or loose leaf paper, and there's a bit of charm in exploring these seemingly hand-drawn worlds on vintage Nintendo hardware. Certainly the scenery greatly benefits from the style and looks pretty good too. I do wish the individual characters were a little larger though, at times they seem a bit too tiny for my tastes, but at the very least you could make out the scissors, erasers, and thumbtack things. So determining what can or cannot be bopped on shouldn't be that difficult to figure out, and if you can't figure it out, try jumping on a bed of thumbtacks with your bare feet and see if you can unalive those. Have fun with that, by the way. By the way, nice touch with the spiral staying in place while the rest of the screen scrolls. A little thing, sure, but still a nice detail. On the audio front, you've got some light-hearted, pleasant-sounding tunes, one for each world, and very little in the way of actual sound effects to get in the way of the admittedly catchy earworms that greet you for the brief time you'll be playing. Although I do find it funny that during the intermissions you could press the A button and it'll still make the jumping sound. That actually gave me a bit of a chuckle. Overall, Doodle World's time might be brief and its gameplay perhaps too simplistic for most folks, but there's enough charm and personality oozing out of the package that you can't help but admire the effort. First found this game on the Antstream service, which is a good place to try the game out, and the stream actually held up quite nicely on the Atari box side. But you could also purchase the downloadable ROM, which includes extras like a soundtrack and a printable manual with some fun activities, which I did eventually get. What can I say? Despite its somewhat brief run, I like the game well enough, and these are some fine, wholesome folks who deserve a little change for their efforts. And they're doing a sequel, so you know what? Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And this was also a fun time while it lasted, so yeah, Doodle World. Good, wholesome, harmless fun.